check out the Full Press Hockey Podcast with Jim Biringer, the best in the business. It's going to be great.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Full Press NHL Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Biringer, the voice of Full Press Hockey. I'm joined today by a great man in the hockey business. He's Toronto Correspondent for NHL.com. You hear him on Sirius XM, NHL Network Radio, Sunday Brunch, and he's on Ice Cap, and he fills in on the point as well. Mr. Dave McCarthy.
Jim, what's going on, man?
Hey, not much, man. Good to have you here. Lots of interesting items coming out of Toronto. Another first-round playoff loss, but the big news is Sheldon Keefe fired in Toronto, and now is the head coach of the New Jersey Devils.
Yeah. Look, I think it's the type of situation where in Toronto, I wasn't necessarily surprised that it happened. I don't also necessarily think that all of the issues that the Leafs suffered from should fall at the feet of Sheldon Keefe. But the fact of the matter is, Jimmy'd been here for 6 years. He had six kicks at the can, and ultimately at that point, you typically need to try and find another voice. One way or the other, because the fact of the matter is most coaches don't get that many kicks at it to begin with, and two, you can't change all of the players even if you want to. So that really was the next step for Toronto, but I'm glad to see Sheldon getting right back in the mix in New Jersey. I think he's a really good coach, and I think he's evolved and gotten better over his time in Toronto to the point where, oddly, I think maybe the 2 or 3 best games he ever coached with the Leafs were in games 5, 6, and 7 against the Boston Bruins. I thought the Leafs played really well in those games, obviously to come back from 3-1 to force a game 7. And they were a shot away in game 7, but didn't get the break. So I think he's taken over a team in New Jersey that is in a very similar position to the team that Sheldon took over in Toronto back in 2019. And I think with the experience that he's gained over the last handful of years, I think he's a much better coach now than he was then. I think this Devils team is in position to really contend and to be very good for quite some time. And I think Sheldon was a good choice.
Speaking of that, Sheldon Keefe, I was looking at the roster construction of both teams, and is it fair to say that Sheldon Keefe did more with less in Toronto when you look at the Devils roster as it is standing today?
Well, he certainly didn't have the caliber of blue line that he projects to have in New Jersey, with Dougie Hamilton, provided he can remain healthy, and Luke Hughes, provided he can continue to develop. I mean, there's Dougie Hamilton is what he is, and he's pretty good when he's healthy, and there's a pretty high ceiling there with Luke Hughes. I don't think Sheldon ever really had a blue line of that caliber in Toronto. Now, the funny thing is in Toronto is that defensively, certainly the last couple of goes around in the playoffs was not the issue. It was their inability to score, even though you talk about the Leafs and a lot of people bring up the fact that, well, their blue line is not what it needs to be. And I agree, it still requires some work, but the biggest issue in Toronto was that they couldn't score at the most important time of year. So, look, I think Sheldon will continue to zero in on making sure that the Devils are strong defensively. That's non-negotiable. It has to be that way. If you aren't, you don't have a chance in the playoffs. But I think he'll do a good job of further unlocking their top offensive players. And I think there's some pretty good depth on that roster up front as well. So, look, issue number one for New Jersey, much like here in Toronto with Craig Berube, the general manager has got some work to do in the offseason. In Toronto, it's refitting the top of the roster, probably moving one, if not two, of the top guys who we've now seen. Good players individually, collectively doesn't work. That's going to be on Brad Treliving's agenda. In New Jersey, Tom Fitzgerald's got to get a goalie. Mm-hmm. End of discussion. And if the two managers can't do those things, the new head coaches aren't going to be able to come in and wave a magic wand and suddenly fix everything. Those things need to happen first. So, that's on Tom Fitzgerald. Got to get a goalie. If you can't get a stop, you don't have a chance. And, at this point, it's become clear that is a requirement in New Jersey.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. The goaltender must happen this summer. It should have happened last summer. It didn't. Okay, they went in a different direction. They went younger on defense. Okay, you mentioned it, Sheldon Keefe, great defensively in games 5 through 7. If you can play great defense in front of your goaltender, that gives your goaltender confidence. And you saw that even with Samsonov. I mean, look, yeah, he gave up the goal where he was positionally in the overtime. We can all break that down. But playing good defense in front of your goaltender really helps your goaltender. And I thought Toronto's goalies in games 5 through 7 in the playoffs against the Bruins played well.
Yeah, they did. I mean, there was a number of things that broke down on an overtime winner. Least of which is Mitch Marner. I know he got a lot of heat for that, but it's not the winger's job to follow the opposing team's winger deep into the zone. You might want to try to impede him a little bit in the neutral zone without taking an interference penalty. And guys that are skilled in the dark arts of playoff gamesmanship are able to do that. So there was a bit of fault there. Morgan Riley turned the wrong way. And then by that point, it was too late with the amount of speed that Pasternak was coming into the zone with. And then Samsonov got caught in a moment of indecision. So there were three things that broke down, and ultimately the goal was scored. But the Leafs defensively were really good. Issue is if some of the top guys are able to shoot one in the net every now and again, you don't get to overtime. And for a team that was founded around offensive prowess, it's a big problem because it's been the case for the last number of years, is that push comes to shove, Leafs can't score in the postseason. So that's going to be a thing. But I think he's going to do a good job in New Jersey because that's where he's really improved as a coach. When he first took over, there wasn't a lot of attention toward defensive structure, but in the last certainly 2 years, he's really hammered that home, that this is non-negotiable. And then once we take care of our own end, you do it my way in our end, you can do it your way in the offensive end. But your way in the offensive end hasn't worked. And that's why I think a change is required with the Leafs top players as well.
Yeah, you mentioned it before. Craig Berube comes in as the new head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. You were there for the press conference, and what was the message coming out from Berube and towards what he wants for this team?
Well, look, I wasn't overwhelmed, though I go into these type of press conferences now, given how long that I've done this, not expecting very much. You don't generally find solutions to world peace, so to speak, in an introductory press conference, right? I wasn't expecting Craig Berube to get out the projection screen and unveil a 10-point PowerPoint plan of we're going to do this and that and this and that, and because of this is going to happen, and because of that, this is going to happen, and then we're going to win. It doesn't work like that, right? But what I took from it was a couple of things. One, accountability. And I like what Brad Treliving said as well. Please don't take this to suggest that because Craig Berube said he's going to do it, he got hired because Sheldon Keefe didn't do it. Please don't take it that way. That's not the point. You just need a new voice sometimes. But Craig, look, he's a guy that stressed accountability and stressed that one of his best assets, he thinks, is his ability to communicate. And again, please don't take that to mean, well, that means that Sheldon Keefe was not true. He was a very good communicator as well. I think at times, though, especially early in his career, right? Sheldon was a young guy, is a young guy. And wants to coach for another 25, 30 years, whatever it might be. So when he took over it was about sort of massaging relationships and making sure guys didn't tune him out very quickly, and gave him the racetrack to build up a bit of a resume and a body of work in Toronto, which he did quite well. And there was the notorious example a couple of years ago where he called out, and pretty innocently, let's be honest here, called out his best players and just simply said, yeah, our best guys weren't good enough tonight, which is pretty tame stuff. And then the next day came out and walked it back, which to me, that was like, okay, we're starting to lose the point here. Craig Berube is not in that position in his career. Craig Berube is 60 years old, or going to be 60 years old, whatever it is, next year. It is what he is at this point. He's going to do it his way. And I don't know what type of language we're able to use on your podcast. So just the fact that I said that and have now edited myself, the words that I would prefer to use. Think Paul Maurice. He doesn't give a damn. He's going to say the way it needs to be. And if you don't like it, that's going to be a you problem, not a me problem, if I'm Craig Berube, right? Because what I took from it is he wants to play north-south. There's not going to be east-west ice capades. It's going to be a more direct style of hockey, even in the offensive zone, which is a bit of a change from what the Leafs tried to do, certainly in the early days under Sheldon Keefe. But if something needs to be said, he's going to do it directly, but he's going to build a relationship with his players, so that when you go to a guy with direct critique, not criticism, but critique, there's one, an acceptance, and two, almost an expectation from the player that, of course, I'm going to hear this from the head coach, because there's going to be a belief when he goes to the guy, shows you the video and says, I'm not even going to name a name, it doesn't matter, but it's like a top player, and says, like, whoever it is, look, come on, you that's not going to cut it, right? And the guy is going to say, yep, you're right, coach, you're right. And then he's going to give you an opportunity to fix it. And then if 3 or 4 games persist and it still hasn't been corrected, we've seen in St. Louis, Craig Berube is not against taking one of his best players and sitting him beside guys like you and I upstairs for a game or two, to make sure that the message is driven home. And that was never going to happen in Toronto, a top player sitting out. But I think it will this year if issues persist in how they play, which comes down to toughness. And as Craig said, it's not about running guys into the 18th row and coming off the top rope and fighting, but it's winning 50-50 puck battles 95 times out of 100. No more like the infamous clip from Mitch Marner in whatever that was, game 1, game 2, where he's coming in the corner and then for whatever reason, like, jumps onto the other side of the puck and loot, like, I don't know what the hell that was. But that's not going to fly. So that's the type of stuff that I think Craig stressed in the press conference, and now we'll simply see how he applies it and if he holds to the message when examples crop up throughout the year.
Hey, and you mentioned it, the 50-50 battles, and that was something, it brings me back to November when we were at the Hall of Fame, and Pierre Turgeon talked about winning 50-50 battles when he played for Ken Hitchcock and winning those board battles, and that's something that I think the Maple Leafs really need to do more of. I thought I was impressed by it in games 5 through 7, but there were games in games 1 through 4 they didn't do it, especially the 2 games on home ice. I don't know what that was, because I said to myself, okay, if they played like this in games 5 through 7 and games 1 through 4, they're winning the series. And I just didn't understand where things went wrong. But again, it's Toronto and the expectations, and it's Boston, and it's a mental thing. I get it. But having a coach like that to come in there and instill in you got to win these puck battles is important.
Yes, that's the enigmatic part about Toronto, is that you see it. You see it there. And oftentimes it comes when they're at the last chance saloon, when their backs are up against the wall, when they're down 3-1 in a series. And then you see it for 2.5 games to the point where they get themselves right there, as they talk about in locker cleanout day every year. And then they lose. And then it gives them the ability to come out and say, yeah, we're right there. If they had lost in game 5, you can't honestly say you're right there. I still don't think they should be saying they're right there after you're not right there to anything. If the goal is winning the Stanley Cup, you're not in the same zip code. If the goal is to win the first round, sure, you're right there. But can you see the team doing it 3 more times in it? No, right? So that's the frustrating part, because you've seen it, but not until it's too late. And the best teams that win and go on long playoff runs, they do it every night, right? The New York Rangers have done it every night this year in the playoffs, save for game 1 of the 3rd round. But then they've done it games 2 and 3, and they've taken the lead. So out of how many games have they played? 4, 6, 10. So they've done it 12 of 13 games. That year, that'll cut it. Doing it 2.5 of 7 is not going to cut it. And that's where the Leafs run into problems. So yeah, it's hard to play like that game in, game out, but you're going to run into a team in the playoffs that's going to do it. And if you're not willing to do it yourself, or capable or able to, or cognizant enough to do it in time, you're not going to go very deep.
Yes, I 100% agree with you on that. And you mentioned the quote right there. It was interesting to listen to Morgan Riley, who's been there a while now with the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Let me just interject there. Yeah. Yes. He's the guy who comported himself the best. Continue.
Yes. No, I just wanted to bring up, because Riley, he's like, are we right there? Because we keep losing. And you hear everybody else, and I don't know if it's because I'm not there in Toronto all the time. You are. But it feels like it's just robotic, same answers every year. But Riley, for the first time, sounded like somebody who was really upset. And he's like, are we really right there if we keep losing in the first round?
Yes, he nailed it. He said what I thought needed to be said in a less bullish type way. And by bullish, I mean like the animal, like a bull, a less bullish type way than Nathan MacKinnon, who, when he loses, basically says, and again, think of language that Paul Maurice uses, it's not good enough. We lose 2 rounds early. We're not near where we need to be, and I'm pissed. I thought Morgan Riley captured that messaging in more family type language by saying, and he's right. It felt simultaneously like it's attainable, which it is. This is not a team like the Washington Capitals, who squeezed in and you knew they weren't long for the playoffs. It feels attainable, yes, but at the same time, a long ways away. That's how they have to be thinking. Not, we're right there. You're not. And to think you are is to dilute yourself. And so, look, I will never question John Tavares' work ethic. The guy doesn't cheat you on work ethic. But he's not the same player that he was earlier on in his career at this point in time. And I have to tell you, listening to what he had to say yesterday after Canada lost in the bronze medal game, I was getting flashbacks again. Talking about how it's an honor anytime you get to wear the Team Canada jersey. It's an honor anytime you get to wear the Toronto Maple Leaf jersey. But it was disappointing and we didn't get the result. But it was disappointing and we didn't get the result. Like, oh man, I need to stop hearing you talk about not getting results. right? You need to find a way to get results.
Yeah, no,
So
seriously. And he said it too after they lost that. They blew that lead to Austria up 7-1. Also, learning lesson.
lessons. Stop with the lessons, man.
No.
The classroom shouldn't be in Europe too. So yeah, right. Like I thought Morgan Riley was bang on, but I still thought, he could have been stronger, and I certainly thought some of the top guys could have been a lot more strong. Take responsibility and say, at the end of the day, it's on me. I get paid 10, 11, 13. I'm mentioning everyone's salary, so
Yeah.
you can't think I'm singling
Yeah.
anybody out. But I get paid that kind of money to score. And again, I didn't. And so if I'm not going to, we're not going to have a chance. So I need to find a way to do it. And we lose in the first round again. Our goal is to win a Stanley Cup. I'm pissed. That's what I was hoping for. Didn't really get much of that. And so I think a little bit of a shift in mindset also needs to occur more toward how Morgan was thinking, which is to say, yeah, it's attainable here for sure, but we're also not nearly right there if we think coming back here again in the fall and doing the same thing again and expecting it to change is going to be different, because that comes down to how we play in terms of winning puck battles. What we're doing there is acceptable. It's not. And all those types of things. There needs to be a change in the mindset to recognize, like Colorado a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, when they lost to Vegas. Yeah, we're a good team every year, but we get pumped in the second round. And again, use those words. And then they played like it the next year, where, as I said, Nathan MacKinnon, and it started with him. If he went to Pamplona, Spain, Jim, and participated in the running of the Bulls, he would be playing for the Bulls team. The people would be running from him. And it came down all throughout that lineup, and it needs to start with the top guys in Toronto.
Yeah, Dave, and you mentioned the top guys, and I even bring in management on this because Keith Pelly had the press conference with Brad Treliving and Brendan Shanahan, and it reminded me of when Al Davis, who's, rest in peace, former owner of the Oakland Raiders, come out and say, "Just win, baby." The fact that he's like, "We're not here to sell jerseys, we're here to win," and all that. Like, I mean, it's a great quote and everything, and it's what the fans need to hear. But it felt like there's a shift because it feels like this is his team, even though Shanahan's the president of hockey operations. It feels like, all right, it's going to be a collective, and we're going to let you do your thing, but I'm watching you now.
Honestly, that's not how I was struck in that press conference. Quite honestly, I was underwhelmed deeply by what Keith Pelly had to say. All we're interested in winning. Thanks for that. And then he shared an anecdote of when he was going through the interview process that he asked ownership, what is the goal? And he said they told him win, win, win. Keith Pelly's not stupid. Even if that wasn't the response, I don't think he would have come out and said, yeah, ownership was like, you know what, we'd like to sell tickets, and if you can keep the sponsorship money rolling in and the bottom line looking good, yeah, we're cool with that. And if you find a way to win too, that's great. But really, just worry about the bottom. He's not going to say that. So that I found underwhelming. I was expecting. I mean, no one's going to be Tim Lewicki, but I was expecting closer to that than what I heard, which was he took essentially a flamethrower to the place when he took over in whatever that was. I forget the year now, some time ago. But he took a flamethrower now to the point where, you had to have some upper executives go to him and say, sir, like, please, stop talking about parades, the pictures, probably shouldn't take the pictures off the wall. And then he walked that back. But it became clear that winning was what it was all about. That was clear, not just sure you'd like to win, which is how I took it. And look, the Raptors won, and TFC won, and the Marlies won, and the Argos later when they came under the umbrella won, and the Leafs got much better. That's what I was expecting. I thought he was a little wishy-washy, to be honest. Opened with an anecdote about how the last time he was there was when his kid played minor hockey. Like, nobody cares. Nobody cares. It's not folksy time, man, at this point. And I thought a really good question was asked. Sheldon Keefe loses his job, one playoff win in 6 years. Brendan Shanahan's been here for 10 and has one playoff round. Coach loses his job. Shanahan retains his job. Why? Just after Brad Treliving was asked about Sheldon and said, well, I know I've only been here a year, but I could not look at that year in a vacuum. I had to look at the body of work. Keith Pelly says, well, I've only been on the job for a month, so that I can only assess what I've seen in that time, and then proceeded to read Brendan Shanahan's resume as a player, which to me was utterly bizarre. Has nothing to do with his resume as a manager. I thought that was a little bit weak. So no, I thought Brad Treliving was the guy who comported himself best in that press conference. I was underwhelmed with Shanahan and Keith Pelly, to be honest.
Do you think Shanahan, this is his last year in Toronto? I mean, I know he's due for a contract extension. It's his last year. I mean, I would think if the results aren't there, he has to go, right? I would think.
I'm surprised that he's continuing this coming season. So in saying that, you can assume what my answer would be to the broader question.
Yeah. You mentioned Brad Treliving, and you mentioned it earlier. The Toronto Maple Leafs have a lot of work to do this summer. Not only, defense wasn't their problem, but up front, they have to redo this roster some way, shape, or form, moving out some top players. And I know Brad Treliving mentioned he wants goaltending as well. It seems like everybody needs goaltending these days. But and it's tough because these players now have no move contracts. Everybody has one.
It was like Oprah a few years ago in Toronto.
Exactly.
You get it.
And last year was the year to move guys out because they weren't in effect. Now It's tougher to do it this year, but do you think it's going to get to a point where it's Marner or somebody else that get moved? Obviously, it's not going to be Nylander and Matthews because they just got extensions. So it's two guys. Is it the captain or is it Marner? And can they even do it? I know it's a broad question, but
yeah, I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, if John and Mitch both say no thanks, then the answer is no. So look, I'm glad you put it that way, because let's not be stupid here. It's not going to be Matthews or Nylander, just based on it's not going to be Matthews, and you just signed William Nylander to an 8-year deal. So it has to be Marner, because you're at a tipping point now with where he is on his contractual calendar. And if it was the other way around, if Marner had just been signed to a long-term deal and Nylander was a year away from free agency, I would be saying, well, it's not going to be Marner or Matthews. It must be Nylander, just because that's the way it is, right? So don't take it as though I'm picking on Mitch Marner, but if you're going to change the look of the core, that's who it's going to be. And so, look, I think you go to Mitch, and he's a good player. He deserves a lot of credit for helping get this team back to a position where they show up in September and they know they're in the playoffs for fun. And for a lot of years in Toronto, that was not the case. But he has not shown himself to be nearly as effective in the playoffs. So you have to ask yourself a question. If you're Brad Treliving right now, do we sign him to an extension? And if so, what does that extension look like? And I can tell you, from Marner's standpoint, it's not going to be for less than he's making right now, which is already too much. Yep. So that presents a problem. So the answer is no to that. It better be no. If he says that he would be willing to take a long-term deal at 9.5, I'd listen to that, but he's not going to. Also, if he did, representatives from the Players Association would be showing up at his door in very foul moods. Mm-hmm. So he's not going to do that. So then the only other answer is we must look at exploring a trade to try to get some value back for, which is still a very valuable asset. So you go to him and you say, look, Mitch, we thank you for everything that you've done here. But there will be no extension. You will walk in free agency, but that won't leave your legacy in a very good position in Toronto, a city in which you have grown up in and live and want to come back to and have your name still be viewed positively, which it will be in Toronto if you agree to help us get something back for you and work with us throughout this process. So would you like to do that? Or would you, as is your right, say no, play out the final year and walk out the door in free agency, to which point we will let it be known that you refuse to work with us, and that won't do your legacy very good at all. It sounds pretty harsh, but that's business. Like, I hate to say it, folks, but that's business. And everything is not always rainbows and unicorns and pats on the back and good try medals. That's how it works in business. And so you do it this way, and really you look at it like this. Everybody wins. Mitch gets to go to a place of his choosing that he wants, and gets likely an extension involved in the deal that is to his liking. And the Leafs get something back for him. And he talked about, and I thought this was really instructive on Locker Cleanout Day, the love that you still see in Toronto for the guys who won the NBA championship for the Raptors in 2019. That showed you that Mitch is really thinking about what his legacy will be here in Toronto, because they allowed themselves to be moved to get something back for them. And a lot of those guys are still revered. Like even Kawhi is still, like, the guy delivered a championship. So he's well thought of, but other guys who allow themselves to be moved in subsequent years still thought of very highly. So I think that kind of showed you where he might be leaning. And I think that's what needs to be done. I really do. So we'll see if it goes down that way, or we'll see if Craig Berube, if that was part of the interview process for him, who knows? He might have said, what are we doing with Mitch? Don't trade him. I want him. I think I can fix that. I think I can turn him into a guy that we need. And if that's the case, well, then he better come out and say that, because that'll help shift the narrative in the right direction. And then it'll sort of put it on Mitch to heed the message. That could be a possible ability too. So it'll be quite interesting to see how that plays out. But I guess the long answer would be, I hope that there will be no long-term extension, that more money on July 1st, because I do not think that would be the prudent course of action right now.
I agree with that. I don't think a long-term extension in Toronto for Mitch Marner would work out at all. It's just too much money, and we're doing the same thing over and over again with this core that clearly it isn't working. One playoff
win. Be a tough sell, right? Would be a tough sell.
Tough sell. And look, I like the guys that Trey Living brought in the summer, Bertuzzi and Max Domi. I thought those guys did well. Hopefully they can bring back one of them. Again, the Maple Leafs are up against that salary cap, and it's going to be tough to do a lot of things. But again, to me, I look at it this way. All right, yeah, you said it. It's a tough business. Somebody brought this up to me one day, and they said, well, when did we start, wanting to get assets for guys that were walking in free agency? The biggest asset is salary cap space. Okay, if Mitch walks, he walks. Okay, that's great. Now we can redo this team the right way. But I still agree you should try to get something for somebody. But, look, I think the Maple Leafs have a lot of work to do. And, I know that core is going to be a priority, but I think there are other priorities as well, right, Dave?
Well, yeah, but I mean, when did we start? Well, it's about prudent asset management. So, they went into the season with William Nylander unsigned, and he ultimately signed, and the intention clearly was to sign him, and I think it was the right course of action. I think he's been pretty good in the playoffs throughout his tenure here. But guys that you don't expect to return, you'd be foolish not to try to get something for them, especially when they have proven in the past that they haven't delivered you anything at the most important time of year to begin with. So I just think that's about prudent asset management. But yeah, as we talked about, there's other things they need to do. Probably need to look at a goalie. like to see them shift the D around a little bit and reallocate some money. And you're able to do that if you can move a top guy.
Yeah. So getting off the Maple Leafs real quick, your thoughts on the Stanley Cup playoffs so far, especially rounds 2 through now through the conference final. I mean, the first round was a little bit underwhelming, but I think the hockey and the play is really picked up in rounds 2 and 3.
Yeah, it has. I think it's been a much more predictable result so far here in the playoffs. There have been a lot of upsets early on, and as a result, I think we've got a proper conference final with the best four, if not four of the best 5-6 teams that were left. There's 4 real quality teams here. I don't think we'd be shocked if any one of them won the cup. So I think, typically speaking, the first round can be a little bit wild. You get a few upsets. Then maybe there's a bit of a drop off in the second or third because you get a few teams through that maybe shouldn't be there, and then they get handled pretty easy. This time around, I just think we're on a slow arc up to better hockey as we continue to move along here with real heavy teams still left, and it's a proper conference final right now. So I no wonder the games have been close. No wonder a lot of games have been going to overtime. These are 4 real good teams left.
And speaking, one of the teams, the Edmonton Oilers, they made the coaching change early on in the season. You have to be impressed at the fact that the way they're playing defense. And I think, obviously everybody pins everything on Stuart Skinner and the goaltending there. He hasn't been the reason. I mean, outside of a couple of games here in the conference final, he's looked really good and really refreshed, and the defense in front of him has really helped him.
Yeah, he's been pretty good, and he must be in this series against Jake Ottinger, because Ottinger, I think, stole the first period the other night in game 2 when Edmonton was clearly the better team. Look, Edmonton's right there. I think they've changed their game to a point where they're capable of winning tighter, low-scoring, heavier, grinded-out type games at this time of the year. Connor McDavid has remember when everybody got their underpants in a knot 3 years ago when John Tortorella had the audacity to suggest on ESPN that Connor needs to change his game just a little bit, not turning him into a mucker or grinder, but just a little bit at this time of the year. And that's exactly what he's done. It's exactly what he's done. And so even when he's not producing, he impacts the game, and they've got now guys that are able to produce when it's not McDavid producing. Like Nugent Hopkins has been really effective. Draisaitl, Hyman, Connor Brown chipped in the other night, even though they lost. Adam Henrique's going to be back tonight, which I think is the right call. So, yeah, I think Evan Bouchard has taken huge strides in his play. So they look like a Stanley Cup team, right? They're built like one. They look like one. They play like one. They're not just a high octane offensive team that is fun during the regular year, but doesn't do much in the playoffs anymore.
Yeah, I mean, look, you always talk about good teams finding a way, and that's what the New York Rangers did in Game 3. I mean, that overtime, that was a wild game because the first 2 games were so low scoring at Madison Square Garden. You felt, same thing, and then you get 9 goals in Game 3. But those you've heard it for years, good teams find a way to win. Look, Alexis Lafreniere's taking the next step in his game. I mean, again, one of those COVID draft guys that finally been put in the right position to succeed. It helps when you're playing with Panarin and Trocheck.
Right.
But the Rangers, to me, are feeling like I've seen them a lot this year. They feel like they're clicking on all cylinders. And it has that feel because they're just finding ways to win hockey games now.
Yeah, I think the Rangers they could be the team to beat. I mean, the way Shesterkin is playing right now, like all world, Hall of Fame level goaltending, quite honestly. Their power play is dangerous. They're getting scoring from depth guys, contributions from all over the lineup. I love everything about the Rangers. I think they could be, I think it's going to be Rangers Dallas in the Cup final, and then it's going to be a tough one because I like a lot about Dallas as well. I think they're kind of the Rangers of the Western Conference right now, the way they're built. But yeah, in the East, I think Florida's a good team too. But I think the Rangers are just a little bit higher on my chart right now. So yeah, I think they're going to find a way to do it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just feel it's got that feel that, you just get those feelings when you watch teams and they grind out wins that maybe they're not supposed to have, or they find ways to win. And I agree with Dallas too. Dallas just feels so good. But again, like you said before, we've got the 4, maybe 5 best teams left in a conference final. And it should be great hockey the rest of the way as they continue in the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Yeah, it should be great. I'm looking forward to it.
Hey, thank you so much for coming on the Full Press NHL podcast today, Dave. Hope we can do it again down the road.
100%, man. Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure, guys. It's been the Full Press NHL podcast. I've been your host, Jim Biringer, Toronto correspondent from NHL.com, Dave McCarthy. Get him on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio on the Sunday Brunch. And get this, YouTube, subscribe, Full Press Hockey Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Take care and enjoy the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Barry Trotz, Nashville Predators, making sure you're listening to Full Press Hockey Podcast.